All right. Our next person up, Mr. Matt Allen, is going to talk to us about a very interesting topic for me, Austrian economics. Mr. Matt Allen, everybody. Let's give him a hand for him.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, so hi, everybody. My name is Matthew Allen. So I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am, why I'm a libertarian. And originally, I was going to talk about Austrian economics, but in preparing this, can everybody hear me? A little better now? Yeah. In preparing this, I realized I'm not 100% qualified to go into very much detail on this and to really do it justice. So I'm going to define Austrian economics and adjust my focus to the things that have piqued my interest in studying economics and in libertarianism. So that'll be the non-aggression principle, private property, capitalism and socialism, and banking, the gold standard, and inflation. So let's see, who I am, I'm Matthew Allen. I've been the secretary for the East Baton Rouge Parish Libertarian PEC, and I currently contribute when I have time. I've been studying libertarianism since the presidential campaign of 2011, so about 3 years. I've read a dozen or so books, read a bunch of articles, watched a bunch of videos. I'm not an expert. I feel like I'm still on the steep side of the learning curve. Yeah, so I'd call myself a minarchist, not quite an anarchist. So right now I'm okay with the idea of the government maintaining an army, a judicial system, and a simple police force. So as I understand anarchy, these functions of government would be privatized. So I'm still studying this, but right now I default to the Constitution and minimal government, minarchy. So why I'm a libertarian? So a lot of people have talked about this. Why I'm a libertarian? It's because libertarians, they present logical and defendable arguments. I see libertarianism as a foundation for higher levels of society to grow on. Namely, charities, philosophies, arts, meaning of life kind of stuff. I think this is a good foundation. All right, so my understanding of Austrian economics is that it's capitalism and it's classic liberalism. So it's the idea of private property, the laws of supply and demand, freedom to and respect of contracts, voluntary exchange, the division of labor, and a sound currency. So the non-aggression principle, let me start off with that. The way I understand it, it's a policy of non-aggression towards non-aggressive people. It's not pacifism. I believe in self-defense. On the individual level, it means to basically keep your hands off me and don't steal my things or break my things. On a foreign policy level, I like to apply it to when is war justified. And I like so. As a reference, this is Ron Paul's book on foreign policy. It's all the speeches he gave while he was in Congress, and that's kind of where I'm going. My basis for this. So he talks about kind of the just war doctrine, and you got to have three things. You got to have an active aggression. When he talked about this, it was when the first Gulf War was getting ready to start. So there has to be an active aggression against us, the United States. All efforts to negotiation have to be exhausted. The proper authority must be responsible for initiating war. So the United States, that's the legislature. That's the people. That's not the executive. So, and then the non-aggression principle, as it applies to business, it's the idea really of voluntary exchange. So getting into Austrian economics, kind of the things I've learned about it, studying it. Private property. I like this definition of it. It's something that you have the freedom to dispose of. So you can sell it, You can give it away. You can even destroy it if you want to. It's yours. You can do whatever you want with it. It may not be economically rational, but it's yours, and you can do whatever you want with it. That's private property. The other thing I've studied lately is socialism. And I read this book by Ludwig von Mises, and he's an Austrian. He's kind of the grandfather of Austrian Economics, he and Bombauer. I learned a lot in this book. So basically, capitalism is private property and the means of production. Versus socialism and communism, really, and that's no private property and the means of production. So that's factories and farms and whatnot. So I think the motivation for socialism is you want equal distribution of finished goods. You don't like poor people having nothing. You want to distribute goods. You want to help people. But the problem with it is that since nobody owns these means of production, they're all kind of publicly owned. You can't buy them and sell them. And so if you can't buy and sell things, you can't calculate value in anything. So if you can't calculate value in anything, you start doing irrational things with very limited resources. The Soviet Union is an excellent case study in communism and socialism. They can't calculate value in anything. Everything kind of collapses. So I mentioned, and a couple people mentioned about the poor. What do you do about the poor? And I'd like to say that I think the way we help the poor is through charities, not through government. Helping the poor is the responsibility of us, you and I. It's our responsibility to help the poor, not the government's, and not bureaucracy. Talking about capitalism, though, there are some problems with capitalism. Kind of. Crony capitalism and monopolies. It gives capitalism a terrible name. Crony capitalism and monopolies, it's when corporations get special privileges from the government. And those special privileges limit competition and competitors from entering the market. So that allows them to raise prices and, terrible things happen. So everybody's heard of corporations having politicians in their pocket. So politicians are to blame here. I guess corporations are too. But this distorts the markets, and it hurts the consumer, hurts all of society. So it is something to be dealt with, something to understand, something to be on the lookout for. Monopoly is different from a single seller. Sometimes the market will only support a single seller. What's nice about excessive profits in a competitive market, though, if you are a single seller, that competition does arise through innovation and something called the substitution of wants. So I'll be around afterwards if y'all want to talk more about this. I'm not going to go into too much detail. And then I want to talk a little bit more on banking, the gold standard, and inflation. And my reference here is Rothbard's book, What Has Government Done to Our Money? This is a good book. This is a short little 100-page book, and it's kind of heresy. It's wild. I think I'd highly recommend it. He says some interesting things in this book. So the most important function of a bank is to provide a secure means for preserving wealth. Right now, banks are inflating our currency and hurting our wealth a lot. Their fundamental obligation is to redeem liabilities on demand. So I want to reference back when we were on the gold standard and the silver standard, I guess, all of our dollars were redeemable for silver on demand. So not anymore, though. We're not on gold standard anymore, but we were. And so there's something called fractional reserve banking, where you would bring in your silver or your gold, and they would give you dollars, and guarantee that they would redeem your dollars for silver on demand, and then take your gold and silver money, and they'd loan it out. So you can't possibly redeem on demand if you turned around and loaned this money out. It's fraud. Fractional reserve banking is fraud, flat out. And that's Rothbard explaining that, not me. And I'll talk a little bit about gold standard and inflation. So our gold standard is a check on government to keep it from inflating and debasing our currency. And that's what they're doing now. So the most blatant way that our government inflates our currency is they'll issue government bonds, and then they'll tell the Federal Reserve to print money and buy their bonds. All right, so now you have more dollars in the system, and the government has them, and they can spend them. So they haven't created any wealth; they just created more dollars, and they have them, and they get to spend them. But now it's made your dollars worth less because you have less of the total dollars in existence. So it's a way of debasing the currency, and it's terrible. I'll be here afterwards if y'all want to talk about things, but I'm gonna end here.